At Lakewood's Drive this morning, we were talking about Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25, the story of Jesus and the storm on the lake and the disciples wavering and sometimes absent faith. And I'm going to read through this again here in a second. The point that I was getting at this morning was that faith needs to be present for us, and we need to find faith in these difficult moments, even though it may be a bit of a challenge. And this is one of those situations where I announce months ahead of time what I'm going to be preaching on, and then the time comes and I wind up doing a sermon different than I thought I was going to do. I think when I had originally envisioned this lesson, I was going to talk about, not in a literal sense, what happened to your faith, where did it go, but literally, where is your faith? Is your faith in Jesus? It should be, but apparently it's not. Well, where do we put our faith in? What do we put our faith in? Faith is not a religious concept inherently. We put faith in all kinds of things. We put faith in a bridge that's going to stay intact when we walk across it or drive across it. We put faith in government, that the sheriff is going to take care of the law and we're going to be relatively safe as we go about our business. On and on we can go. There are all kinds of systems in place, up to and including faith that the fellow coming at me at 70 miles an hour is going to stay on his side of the yellow line. We can't operate as a society without faith. So it shouldn't be that much of a reach for Christians who claim to believe in God, who claim to believe in Jesus, to be able to put their faith in Jesus. And we're going to put our faith somewhere. So if it's not in Jesus in these moments, where is our faith? Where might we put our faith in these moments? That's what I want to talk about here. And I'll begin by reading in verse number 22 from Luke chapter 8. One day he and his disciples got into a boat, and he told them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." So they set out, and as they were sailing, he fell asleep. Then a fierce windstorm came down on the lake. They were being swamped and were in danger. They came and woke him up, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to die." Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waves. So they ceased, and there was a calm. He said to them, "Where is your faith?" They were fearful and amazed, asking one another, "Who then is this? He commands even the winds and the waves, and they obey him." And clearly the point that he's getting at is that your faith should be in Jesus. But clearly it wasn't, at least not in this particular instance. Now, the disciples learned from this occasion and many others like it, and eventually their faith absolutely was in Jesus in the fullest sense of the word. We should be able to learn vicariously. We should be able to learn from their experiences and develop a true faith for ourselves. But as always, there is going to be competition. There are going to be other things for us to put our faith in, beginning with our faith in ourselves. Maybe you have a fair amount of money. Maybe you are physically strong. Maybe you have good connections, whatever it happens to be. There is a sense in which we assume that we have control over our world. And to a certain degree, we do. There are things that are within our control, and we try to exercise that control so that things will go well for us instead of going poorly. That's how you survive on planet Earth for our 10 years or whatever. The assumption, though, is oftentimes that we are so good at this small measure of control that we can exercise in certain specific situations that we can trust ourselves in these adverse circumstances that come up, that we are going to be able to handle it. We're going to be able to deal with these situations in such a way as to get us to the other side in as good or better place than we were before. And again, to a certain degree, we can do that. But there are things like, for instance, the weather, that are completely and totally outside of our control. The economics, world economics, or world peace. We could go on and on. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of factors that are going on in our everyday lives that affect us every single day, over which we have zero or practically zero control. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to just fool ourselves? Are we going to just assume that we're stronger than we actually are? Hopefully not. What we need to make sure that we can do is realize the difference between what is in our control and what is not in our control. And Pilate is an interesting example of this. In John chapter 18 and verse number 11, Pilate is not used to being treated the way that Jesus is treating him, not disrespectfully, but dismissively. And Pilate says, I'm the one who has authority or power, some versions have, to release you or to crucify you. Don't you understand what kind of power I have? And Jesus just matter of factly says, you don't have any power at all unless God gave it to you. And that must have been a real slap in the face to somebody like Pilate, who assumes that because the levers of power are in his grasp, that he can do whatever he wants to do. Well, that is, even in a position like Pilate's position, that is very limited. He answers to the emperor. He answers to Caesar. And to a certain degree, he answers to circumstances as well. There could be an uprising. There could be circumstances that come up that threaten his power, that threaten his ability to exercise control, whatever control he does have here. He's used to thinking that because Rome is behind him, he's going to be fine in whatever circumstance he comes across. And he does not realize, and is actively trying to avoid realizing, that none of this is real. It's all manufactured. It's all assumed. Even Rome itself is not an absolute guarantor of power, of authority. Just because Caesar today is behind him doesn't mean he's going to continue to be behind him. And Pilate eventually found out about that, by the way, historically speaking. What we need to do in our situation, as we are effectively paying our bills or moving heavy objects or whatever it happens to be, that we are doing with our own so-called power. Whatever we have in this life, whatever opportunities and abilities we have to conquer our circumstances, this power is given to us and may very well be taken away from us by God. Our very own bodies, the money in our bank, the political climate that benefits us, etc. We could go on and on. All of these things are subject to God, up to the literal laws of nature themselves. Everything is under the authority of God. And therefore, it is necessary for us to remind ourselves every once in a while that you cannot still every storm. In fact, if God is opposed to you, you can't still any storm. There is no power that you can exercise that is going to get you where you want to go. Now, it very well may be that God will let things play out naturally and things will happen in a predictable sort of way, and you'll get to where you think you are going, largely, or at least presumably, largely because of the choices that you made, and you give yourself the credit for that. It happens every single day. Every person on planet Earth does that kind of thing. And that's fine. But just because God allows you to exercise power doesn't mean he will continue to allow it, and it doesn't mean that it is of your own creation, that it is completely under your control. It's not. Ultimately, all things are under God's control. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to pick on a concept that has really been under my saddle, a burr under my saddle for quite some time, and that is this idea of karma. And I hear Christians referring to karma all the time, and we need to stop this. There is this concept. It is a pagan concept. It has nothing at all to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It has nothing to do with the Bible. This concept of karma, that there is something about nature itself that rights its own ship, that things get fixed just because that's the way the world works. And sometimes it works in the affairs of human beings. Somebody is mean and somebody else treats them meanly also. And, well, there you go. That's karma. Well, there's no doubt that people get what's coming to them every once in a while. There's no doubt that people get good things and they get bad things. You can put whatever kind of label on it you want. But when we borrow from a pagan concept here and assume that this is just kind of hardwired into the world, that it is the rule rather than the exception, A, we're not paying attention, because that is not the way the world works. It works that way sometimes. It works the exact opposite way many, many times. And B, we are tacitly acknowledging that some anti-God concept is ruling in the world that we live in, which is, that's the Ten Commandments, right? Have no other gods before me. Karma is not ruling the world. Pardon me, God is ruling the world. We could turn to any number of the Psalms to address this. I'm going to refer you to Psalm 12 as just one example here. David writes here, "Help, Lord, for no faithful one remains. The loyal have disappeared from the human race. They lie to one another. They speak with flattering lips and deceptive hearts. Bad things happening, bad people doing them. May the Lord cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that speaks boastfully," verse 3 says. They say, "Through our tongues we have power. Our lips are our own. Who can be our master?" That's that arrogance that we were talking about in the first point. There is this assumption among evildoers that they are getting away with it because they're so clever, they're so smart, or they're so rich, or whatever. But verse number 5, "Because of the devastation of the needy and the groaning of the poor, I will now rise up, says the Lord." Not karma, I will rise up, he says. "I will provide safety for the one who longs for it. The words of the Lord are pure words, like silver refined in an earthen furnace, purified 7 times. You, Lord, will guard us. You will protect us from this generation forever. The wicked prowl all around, and what is worthless is exalted by the human race." What is worthless, again, going back to these pagan concepts here, this is not worth anything. This is human philosophy that works when it works and it doesn't work when it doesn't work. And all of it is under the auspices of God, who always accomplishes his purposes. We don't always see it working. We don't always live long enough to see it work in its fullness. We don't always recognize it. We certainly don't always give him the glory for all of these things. But God is truly sovereign in the world. And if we are going to look for wrongs to be righted, we have to look to God. Ultimately, now, that's not to say that you and I can't take personal responsibility with regard to calling the police when a criminal does a bad thing or something along those lines. There's a role for us in this process. But as far as proper justice, permanent, ultimate justice being meted out, if you've been on planet Earth very long at all, you know that is not the rule. Bad people get away with bad things a lot for a very, very long time, and sometimes they live their entire lives doing bad things and profit tremendously. Job really wrestles with this in his story, telling his friends here this idea of bad people getting what's coming to them is all fine and good, but in reality, it doesn't work that way. At least it doesn't always work that way. What we have to have confidence in is that God, in his way, in his time, is in fact going to fix these things. I worry that we accept this short-term concept of God's justice, this karmic justice, as it were, and when things don't go poorly for the bad people, as we may define go poorly, then we lose our faith in God. What we need to do is accept what God says about justice, what God says about retribution, what God says about his authority and his power and his timetables, if there is in fact even a timetable, and trust that he is going to work all these things out, and leave ourselves to just wait for him to do his thing in his way. It's not our job to make sure that God is on time or that God adequately, sufficiently metes out his justice. That's not my job. My job is to trust in him and allow him to work these things out. He will still the storm when he is ready to still the storm, and I can be content with that. Now, I also want to talk about fair treatment, what we have coming to us, what's right, and I think America has made this argument more powerful and more dangerous. We have convinced ourselves because we have a constitution, because we have the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, all the rest of them, that somehow it is our due, not in the halls of government or at the ballot box or in Washington, but it is our due in life to be treated properly, for things to go well, and we get to define what properly means. We get to define what doing well means. I'm a good person. I don't deserve this. I deserve better than this. I know it's going to turn around for me because I'm a good person, because I do. How many times do we find people who define themselves as not being a good person? We've seen criminals, drug addicts, on and on. We can go, people saying, I'm a good person. I deserve better than this. Well, it's not your job to decide what you do and you do not deserve. It's your job to allow God to tell you what you do and do not deserve. And what you deserve, if you are a sinful soul, if you have committed transgressions against your Creator, what you have earned for yourself is death. That's what Romans 6 verse 23 tells us here, the wages of sin is death. If you have sinned, all sin falls short of the glory of God. Paul talked about that earlier in Romans 3:23. If you sin, you have earned your wage. And if you're like me and every other person I know, you've worked hard for that wage. You have diligently given yourself over to the practice of things that were an affront to God. Even the best of us do that. Even with our best intentions, we fall short over and over again. And so we need to back away from this idea of fair treatment. The last thing in the world we should want is fair treatment. What we want is to throw ourselves at the mercy of a loving and merciful and gracious God who will not give us what we deserve, but rather will give us blessings instead of cursings, who will lift us up when we should be cast down. That's what the death of Jesus on the cross is all about, allowing sinful souls to come into the presence of God and be exalted and rewarded rather than punished in their sins. And let's certainly not go to this ridiculous extreme of thinking that because we are such good people, as we may define good, that ill treatment is not appropriate. It's not fair that the boss fires me for no good reason, as I may define no good reason, or on and on we can go. I'm being picked on by the police, or my teachers are giving me bad grades because they don't like me, or whatever it happens to be. I'm not saying those things aren't true or that they aren't unfair. They very well may be. I'm saying it doesn't matter as far as global conditions go. The storm that you are in may very well not be of your making. There may be some bad circumstances that are brewing here that are bringing you to this place, and it's making your life miserable, and you didn't ask for this, and it's beyond your control. That's fine. I'll concede the point. Fine. But just because you don't deserve the storm doesn't mean the storm's going to stop. I caution you very firmly with regard to this. Don't just assume it has to stop because that's what happens to good people, and you're one of the good people. Sometimes horrible things happen to good people, and they continue to happen to good people. So whether you are or are not deserving of such and such, that doesn't mean it's going to stop. What it means is that we have that much more opportunity with these thorns in the flesh, to borrow from Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 12. With these thorns in the flesh, we have that much more opportunity for us to lean on Jesus, which is, of course, the whole point of the story that we read in Luke chapter 8. Jesus is the one who stills the storm. And ultimately, hopefully, we get to the point where we realize that he is the only one who can still the storm. He is the only one who can bring us the peace that passes understanding that Paul writes about in Philippians 4, verse 7. He is the only one who can do this. And the great thing about the peace that Jesus provides is we don't have to wait for it to show up in physical form. We don't have to wait until the time when everything gets fixed. We can live in our misery, in our discomfort, in our state of unfairness, however you want to describe your storm as it happens to be in this moment here. You don't have to wait around for the storm to get better to realize what an incredible Savior you have. Now, it's very easy for us, of course, to criticize the apostles and say they should have realized that Jesus was there in the boat with them, and any kind of threat against them was presumably a threat against Jesus also, and that Jesus is the Son of God, and God would surely never allow anything horrible to happen to Jesus, and they are the hand-chosen ones of Jesus, and so carrying out his will would seem to involve them being able to carry it out themselves. And so through all these logical twists and turns, you realize it's going to work out for us okay. And this storm is not going to hurt us, not badly, not permanently. It must be that way because Jesus is Lord. It's all fine and good for us to say that. We don't act that way in the storm either. I certainly don't. And I suspect you probably don't either. What we need to do in that moment is at least have enough faith, as the apostles did, to go to Jesus and lean on him and say, you are clearly the one who is in charge of these sort of things, and exactly how you're going to manifest that in chargedness remains to be seen. But it's not very cool right now. It's not very great right now. Would you really like to see more of it? And hopefully in that moment, when we go to Jesus, it's not simply a matter of he needs to prove that he is Lord, but rather we need to prove to ourselves that we trust in him, even when, and especially when, times do not go very well for us. So I want to encourage us all here in this storm that we're facing, whatever it may be, financial, spiritual, personal, whatever. Whatever your storm is, trust that Jesus is sovereign in the world, and that by leaning on him, you can find that peace, you can find that serenity. Even if things don't improve, you can know that you're safe in the arms of Jesus, as Fanny Crosby wrote many, many years ago. We can have confidence that our faith that we place in him is well placed, and that however things go or do not go in the short term, he is watching over us, and we are blessed in this boat that he's given us to ride out the storms of life. And if we have enough faith in him, we'll ride them out to safety and ultimately to a greater conclusion, a greater destination on the other side. Thank you very much for studying along, and God bless.